Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to week 9 of the Criminal Justice and Public Health course. I hope you're all well and safe and enjoying the rainy weather that we've been having that we so desperately need. I extend a warm welcome to you all via the TUC campus situated in Vallejo on the occupied and unceded land of the coastal Miwoks and the other First Californians. This week, we are shifting our focus from focusing on the impacts of the health on health brought on by the criminal justice system to really focusing on criminal justice reform, policies, and legislation that have both positively and adversely impacted our communities and individuals, and those that also affect our health collectively. So we're also going to discuss ideas that have been put forth by researchers, activists, legal professionals on how America can reduce its high rates of mass incarceration. And we're very fortunate to be joined by tonight's guest speaker, Mr. Ignacio Hernandez of the Hernandez Strategy Group of Sacramento, California. Mr. Hernandez founded the Hernandez Strategy Group in 2003 after having served as the chief of staff in both the California State Assembly and the California State Senate. As an attorney, Ignacio has represented clients in employment discrimination, wage theft, and criminal cases. He has successfully navigated a litany of proposals through the legislative process in California and has worked to stop hundreds of adverse bills to his clients' interests. Before beginning his career at the state capitol, Ignacio taught in the political science department at San Jose State University. Currently, he sits on the Public Health Interest Law Board of Santa Clara University School of Law. In his career, Ignacio has focused on the impact of inequity as it comes to sentencing and how it affects low-income communities. He has worked to get so much legislation passed, such as notably just a few, AB 672, SB 1050, and AB 701. So without further ado, I welcome Ignacio to our class this evening. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you, everyone. Really looking forward to spending some time with all of you. Let me give just a couple of extra little tidbits about me before I jump in. One, I think this may be my 4th or 5th time, I can't remember, speaking to the class here. And I always enjoy it because it gives me an opportunity to really talk about the issues that I care about, that I work on. And I really don't have frequent opportunities to discuss the work that I do. It's, as I'm sure with all of you, you just kind of go through your busy day, you keep moving and, on to the next challenge and on to the next assignment and task. And so this is a good opportunity for me to reflect. So I appreciate it. As was stated, I opened up a lobbying firm. Actually, last week was my 18th anniversary of opening it up. And, I think what really consistent with what all of you are studying and discussing, I opened up the lobbying firm specifically to be an advocate on social justice issues. Oftentimes, lobbying and social justice advocacy are not put in the same sentence or even thought to be in the same universe. And when I opened the firm, that was my goal, to kind of merge the two. At the time in Sacramento, there were organizations, social justice organizations like ACLU and others that worked these issues, but there weren't a lot. And even fewer were lobbyists contract lobbyists who would work on these issues. And really, maybe 1 or 2 lobbying firms that were dedicated just to these issues. And so at that time, I just thought it was, hugely important for me to commit my professional time to the issues that I cared about and my professional expertise to really trying to make a difference in a way where I really saw a vacancy. As you can imagine, right now, it's a very different time when it comes to criminal justice reform. It's very popular, it's very in vogue, there's a lot of discussion. It's still challenging, but it's very different. When I opened up in 2003, we were just a few years off of, kind of the tough on crime wave. We're really kind of still in the middle of it. And coming off of anti-immigrant statewide ballot measures, anti-affirmative action. It was a very, very different time, but it was also an exciting time. In 1999 is when, a big wave of Democratic legislators were elected to the state capitol. And that's when I first started to work there. And I worked in the Public Safety Committee as a consultant to work on criminal justice reform and to try to stop some of the tough on crime bills and to try to put forward some reform issues that I had worked on as a community activist and attorney. And when I came in, there were the influx of legislators who had come off of the campaigns to try to stop Prop 187, stop anti-immigrant issues, to push back on the anti-bilingual education initiative and the anti-affirmative action initiative. There were so many legislators that really cut their teeth politically and got motivated and organized and activated on those issues. And so it was a great time to come to the Capitol. We were also coming off of 16 years of a Republican governor and, the first Democrat since Jerry Brown the first time. So it was a very exciting time, but it was also very challenging. I went to law school, at a time where those initiatives were on the ballot. So, I just felt like it was the right opportunity for me to lend myself to social justice advocacy in the state capitol. And it really reflect back to a couple of my experiences. And then I'll kind of get into our topic and be prepared. I'm going to ask a lot of questions. So this is going to be a participatory session. So be prepared. When I stepped foot in the state capitol for the first time, I was only going to spend 3 months working in the state capitol. There was my local assembly member out of San Jose asked me to go and work on criminal justice bills. He thought it would be really important for me to learn the inside and how it really works. I was an activist. I was teaching political science. I had worked on a number of criminal justice reform campaigns at the local level, organizing individuals fighting back on police brutality. I mean, really was what I cared about. I had a history as a student activist, the whole nine. And the one thing that he told me was I didn't understand how it really worked behind the scenes. And the one thing about me is, professionally in particular, but I guess personally somewhat, is, I don't like to lose. And the troubling thing for me as an organizer and a community organizer and the work that I did prior was that we lost a lot. We lost a lot. And there were victories as far as folks were empowered, folks found their voice, folks got organized. And those victories are, you can't really calculate how valuable those victories are. So we had those kinds of victories. I saw young people become activated and then see them, pursue professional careers, being activists or lawyers. I mean, that was great. But at the end of the day, I kind of want to win. And, we had city council, vote against us. We had county board of supervisors vote against us. Bills that we wanted, we would lose. The ballot measure, statewide propositions, we would lose. They were putting more of us away in prison because of all these ballot measures. And so when I went to the Capitol, when I was asked to go, I went with a mission to understand, okay, let me understand the mechanics and then bring that back to the community so that I can share that information and my insight, and we can be better at what we do, that we can gain all those other victories, but we could also gain very tangible changes to the law or stopping bad laws. That was something that I just saw a need. And as much as I knew about the political process and as much as I knew about the policy issues, I don't know if any of you have spent time working in the Capitol. I was absolutely overwhelmed by how many bills, how many budget decisions were being made on a weekly basis. And I was completely unaware of those issues. And the organizations that I worked with were completely unaware. And more importantly, we were not at the table. And so you hear about a lot of bills. I'm sure all of you are, fairly aware of certain bills, the ones that make kind of the newspaper and the front page. But there are dozens, if not hundreds, of others that impact the communities that I care about and I work with that are being decided. I had no clue. Budget decisions that are made behind the scenes, not involved, didn't know. And I think probably my first week there in the Capitol, I realized, you know what, I think I want to be here long term, because this can't happen. Like, we can't, no wonder we lose. We're completely out of the loop of what's going on. And so I think at that point, I may not have known it consciously, but I did kind of think about it, like, wow, this is a problem. So anyway, so fast forward, I ended up staying, working as chief of staff, assembly in the state Senate. And then when I left the Capitol, I had worked on campaigns as well. You know, I wanted to be an activist lawyer, right? I wanted to represent folks in criminal defense work, but I also wanted to do more than that. So I kind of fell into lobbying. I'll be honest, you know, I'm anyone who knows me, I'm very straightforward. I opened up and hung my shingle to practice law again. And the first week I had my office, and I still remember who it was that called me. A friend of mine called me and said, hey, we're going to work on some legislation. And you were the staff person in the Capitol on the legislation. Do you remember this a few years ago? I go, yeah, I remember that. We didn't quite get it through, but yeah, I remember that. They're like, well, it was a very big fight. And they said, well, we want to run it again, and we're trying to find a lobbyist, but none of them know the issue like you do. You spent a whole year. I mean, you were so good and thorough. You opened your own office, right? I said, yeah. They're like, oh, so we can hire you as a lobbyist. And I said, you know, seeing that I was literally 4 days into opening my law office and I had one client for legal work, I said, absolutely. You can absolutely hire me to do some lobbying. And then it occurred to me shortly thereafter was, of course, like, this is what I have been complaining about all this time, is that there aren't folks that are a bridge between, folks that are studying it on the policy level, students, activists, community organizations. You know, there's not somebody in the Capitol or in the lobbying space that is bringing that perspective and making those connections. And so with that, I fell right into it. I was fortunate enough to do work, to then get hired by the California Attorneys for Criminal Justice, which is a statewide association of criminal defense attorneys. They are still my client. I was a member of the organization when I practiced law. When I was in law school, I used to read their magazines to, brush up on criminal law, because that's what I wanted to do. I did a lot of work in law school on criminal justice reform. And so they have not only, helped me as far professionally, but it's given me the opportunity, and they've given me a lot of latitude early on to become a very strong voice in the Capitol on criminal justice reform, on a lot of latitude to work on a lot of different issues. And again, when I came in, there just weren't very many people. Or on one hand, I can count how many lobbyists that were working on criminal justice reform, or immigration, or civil rights, or environmental justice. And so those first few years, I was getting hired by all of these organizations to help them learn to lobby, how to lobby in the Capitol, how to be effective. And it was great. I mean, some folks may see early on, I had a lot of different clients that I don't have now. People don't understand that was exactly my role. I was trying to teach these organizations to speak for themselves and advocate for themselves. And so I was able to share my experience with them. And now they're just, killing it. I mean, we have all these immigration groups pushing bills and winning victories. And as an old guy, I like to say, well, I remember when, they had no clue what to do in the Capitol, and they called me and say, can we use you for a year and teach us and help us, get our community activists, integrated into the process. Absolutely. So as I'm getting older now and looking back and hitting my 18 years of lobbying, it gives me a chance to kind of see, look at the path behind me and see what I've contributed, and see the many wonderful people that I've been able to work with. But I say that as an introduction to myself, but really to explain that I'm a lobbyist on paper, but I'm a lot more than that. And there are more and more people like me now that are lobbying, which is great. But it's also a message to all of you that whatever all of you end up doing, moving forward, to the extent that you can carry with you your ideals and your principles and your belief in, whatever policy changes you believe in, and can somehow integrate that into your professional life, it's all worth it. I mean, it is so worth it. I'm so grateful. There's not a day that goes by that I'm not thankful that I work on these issues. There's some days I wish I had days off, but definitely days that I'm thankful. So that's kind of my long introduction, and some of it will come into play as I go forward. But I want to give you a little flavor of who I am, what I do, because I see all of you whenever I talk to the students here. I always see all of you on a journey, academically, educationally, professionally. But it's about more than just, the academics. It's about making a difference in the world around you. And so I always want to take the opportunity to share, my experience is, I see us as collaborators. I see us as colleagues already, working, in the same direction of trying to make change in the world. And so I never thought I'd be a lobbyist. My best friend is an activist and goes all around the country being an activist. And, I always thought that would be me and he would be the lobbyist one day. So, it's you never know where you're going to end up professionally. But that being said, be ready. Here's the part I'm going to start calling on all of you as I get into the substance. Let's talk about criminal justice reform. I don't have to, tell all of you, how troubling it is that, our country, is one of the leaders in incarceration rates in the world, right? It's very problematic. You all know what the problems are. And, my approach to it and my vision of it has always been, the problem with over incarceration is not just on the individual, right? We all know that. And not to diminish that at all, but it's also on that individual's family, that individual's friends. It's also on the next generation. It's also on that individual's community, where they have fewer people in the community that can, contribute in a different way. And it's, as you know, with recidivism, it's a cycle that continues. It's a cycle that continues with children. It results in, even if it doesn't result in incarceration for children or family members, it could, result in drug addiction. It could result in, the inability to really, find sustained work. The extensive negative impact of having such large incarceration rates in California and in the country is, beyond words. And I've always seen my approach to criminal justice reform as being a way to, one, make the law more appropriate. That if we are going to incarcerate folks, we do it the right way, we do it fairly, and we only do it where it's necessary. And even then, we can't overdo it. But I also look at it as a way to kind of break the cycle, right? How do we, if we can get fewer people in prison or there for, shorter sentences, then we're giving folks a better chance to contribute into their own lives, but also the community around them. And we can address, some of the health impacts, that are direct result of incarceration or that are, correspond with high incarceration rates. We can deal with the academic, the underachievement academically. We can deal with economic, impacts of it. And so that's why I enjoy the work. I hope one day, I won't have to do the work, where we say like things are pretty good. But I also see it in kind of three ways. I always break it up, the system, into into three ways. One is on the front end, there's the investigation and the arrest of individuals. Then there is actually 4 or 5. Then there's the conviction and sentencing of individuals. Then there's the actual incarceration. What happens when folks are behind the walls? And then what happens afterwards? Right? Well, how are we reintegrating folks? How are we making sure that they don't go back? How are we providing support? I'm sure all of you talk about that. And then the last part of it is how do we reduce, the recidivism, going back in. And so the approach that I've taken over the years with, the folks that I've worked with has been, we kind of look at each stage and we see where can we address some issues here? Where can we address some issues there? And I was looking at some of the material that all of you were assigned for tonight. And I think I printed one out, the winnable criminal justice reforms. And I kind of laughed. I'm like, was somebody writing out all the things I've been working on for the last few years and my colleagues? Because we've done a lot of these things, or we've worked on a lot of these things. So it actually kind of was good confirmation, like, oh, okay, we're actually working on, I don't know about winnable. I mean, that's a little bit of a misnomer because very challenging to get anything. But let me tell you what I've worked on, and then I'm going to call on all of you. I'm going to give a couple of past examples, and then I'm going to give you some examples of bills that I'm working on right now, and then kind of get some feedback from all of you. And so, one approach that we take is, how do we change the law itself, right? How do we make the law, the statute, more reflective of a balanced approach? And one way to be winnable is to be able to put together an argument, put together research, and put together kind of a strategy where we can argue that the statute needs to change, that it's not fair, that it's out of step. Not necessarily that we want to change it so that we don't arrest people anymore. Like, we know that, like, we can all say that. But when you get to the legislature, and when you're dealing with 120 legislators, many of whom are Republican, many Democrats are from conservative areas, so they are very moderate. How do we package a narrative that will be successful? Because at the end of the day, remember I talked about winning. At the end of the day, there are three numbers that are important. Okay, and you may want to just remember these or write them down. But when it comes to making policy change in California, there are three very key numbers. Right? There's 21. Right? There's 41, and then there's 1. Okay. You have to get, for majority vote bills, you need 21 senators, state senators, to pass a bill. Then you need 41 assembly members to pass it in the assembly. And then you need that one last vote. And that, of course, is the governor to actually sign the bill. And for me, at the end of the day, what distinguishes me from my activist days to my lobbying days is getting those numbers, right? Getting to the 21, getting to the 41, and getting to the 1. It's not the only thing we look for, but at the end of the day, we spend a lot of time pushing for change, and we don't get those numbers. We haven't made that change. So one of the first, I always talk about this bill because it really will go down as one of the first changes to felony law in California in the post tough on crime era. And it was a smaller bill, and it was kind of a test bill, right? We did this to see if we could actually start shifting the narrative. And it was before there's this huge wave of criminal justice reform. And it had to do with drug transportation. Okay, so let me ask you, when I talk about felony drug transportation, give me what kind of scenario pops into your head when I say that? And I'm going to call out some folks. Let's call out Sophia, because you're right in the middle of my screen here. When I say felony drug transportation, give me a fact pattern or what pops in your head.
Sorry, I'm not entirely sure what you mean by felony drug transportation.
Okay, well, what if I told you, oh, someone got arrested for drug transportation? What would you think that would mean? Like, what do you think that person's doing?
I guess like what comes to mind when you say that is that you think they're transporting a large amount of drugs and primarily for distribution, but that's not always the case when someone's arrested for drug distribution.
That's right. That's a great answer. I wasn't calling other folks, but that's a perfect answer. So up until, I can't even remember what year it was now, the California law on drug transportation, there were felony, there were certain statutes for possession. There were certain statutes for transportation. And then there was this weird statute kind of in between that talked about transportation, talked about, bringing drugs across state lines. Okay. But it also had the word transport. And there were prosecutors in California who were arresting individuals who had any amount of drugs, not large amounts, small amounts, an amount that would basically, we would think, be for personal use. And the prosecutors said, well, I'm going to charge you, instead of charging you with the lower level possession charge, I'm going to charge you with drug transportation, simply because you were moving at the time you were arrested. Now, that's not a legal term. That is just the basic layman's term. You were actually in transport. You were moving at the time you were arrested. There were cases of somebody on a bicycle who was stopped by a police. You could probably guess if it was a person of color or not. And they found drugs on his, in his pocket. Boom, drug transportation. Small amount of drugs. There was a case, I think it was Santa Barbara. Somebody went to a party. They had drugs in their pocket. They took a cab home because they couldn't drive, got into a dispute with the cab driver, called the police, because that's what you do, right? The cab driver's, messing with you, calls the police. And the police say, oh, you were in the taxi and you have drugs on you. That's drug transportation. And this essentially was the same charge that was applying to folks, as Sophia described, who had large amounts. That was for distribution. They were part of a sales network. And the appellate courts came out and said, well, technically the way it's drafted, it just says transport. It doesn't make any distinction or any requirement for a certain amount, or that it's even tied to sales. And there were countless individuals that were being arrested in California, being convicted in California, being sentenced to state prison in California, and sometimes federal prison, because of this offense and the way it was drafted. Tragic. When I was in law school, I was fortunate enough to work on a case, and we had the exact same scenario, where the individual was in a vehicle. The officer at night drove around the corner, saw the vehicle come to a stop, talked to the individual, asked him to come out, searched the car, and found drugs, small amount of drugs. And the officer said, well, when I came around the corner, I saw that the vehicle was just nudging forward as if it came to a stop. And so that triggered the drug transportation, as opposed to possession of drugs, where the individual would have been qualified for a drug treatment program and diversion, all these other things, low-level misdemeanor. Instead, he was facing a felony. Oh, by the way, he was undocumented. Oh, by the way, that could result in his deportation. So that one word and lack of defining that one word was having significant impact in people's lives. So we tested it out. We ran a bill, and all we did was say transport means or does not include possession for personal use. That's all we did. We didn't do big fanfare. We didn't do press conference. We didn't do anything else. And we had attorneys calling us from all around the state saying, this is phenomenal. I can't tell you the number of clients I've had go to prison because of this. And so that was not the first, one of the first, where we actually changed a felony law in California. And the ramifications were huge. I received calls, and the author received calls well after the bill was passed and signed into law. It was signed into law. Folks calling, their attorneys calling, their families calling, saying, my God, I wish this was in place 2 years ago, 5 years ago, because it would have saved me. We had a call from someone who was, they were serving a 20-year sentence because they had a felony prior. And this was the felony prior, and they had drugs for personal use. So when I talk about over-incarceration or mass incarceration, or all of you talk about it or read about it, it's not just that somebody did something wrong and that's why they're there. Sometimes our statutes are just out of whack, right? There's really no other way to say it. And so I was fortunate enough to be a part of that. And that really kind of triggered, a growing effort to change some of these laws, okay? So that's one example where we changed the substantive law, but we also work on procedural changes as well. Sometimes procedure is what catches people on. So let me stop right there, because I've been talking a long time already. This is what happens when I work from home and all I do is talk to my dogs and my kids and my wife. So, well, let me stop right there. I'm going to call on a couple folks. I know you guys have been reading about criminal justice reform and policy proposals. I'm going to call on maybe two folks and ask what, if any, policy proposals in the criminal justice space that you're thinking about, that you think would be a good policy change. I just want to get a flavor. I'm not going to ask too in depth before I go on to my next subject. I just kind of want to get a sense of what some of you are thinking. So I'm going to call with someone with a video and someone without a video. So let's see. So look up names. Let's try Tina here in the upper right corner.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I knew you were going to call on me, by the way.
Oh, okay.
I think from just I'm one of the community members, by the way, that's really enjoying this class. And I think for me, the ones that have been sticking out are these fees and fines that people get. And then because of poverty issues or low wages, they can't afford it. And, and even though you can't be, there's no debtor's prison, people, when they have these repeated cycles, end up in some type of, incarcerated or in quote jail because they couldn't pay it, and then they say they're going to pay it, and then they come back, and then I don't know. So maybe some area with that, or just thinking of, and I don't know what the legislation is about, pulling people over.
Mhm.
For police officers pulling people over
Yeah.
for tags violation, or looking them up and saying, oh, your registration is expired, which recently happened to my son, which scared me to death, that I was just kept thinking, oh my gosh, this could have went the wrong way, that he thought his insurance and registration was cleared, but turns out that it wasn't, but his tags were legit. And the police officer pulled him over and said, oh, I just ran your plates and I noticed that there's some issue with your registration. And so he kept at his home, and he kept saying, well, I'm just kind of curious of why you would run my plates.
Right.
What is it about me? Is it the quote luxury car that isn't really luxury? It's a very old car, but it's a luxury brand that his parents gave him. Or the way he looks, but so something in that arena.
Okay. No, that you're exactly right. I mean, there are so many problems with it, and the negative impacts are, immense. There is and you may know this already, there has been a lot of activity on the fines and fees front. There have been a lot of changes in the last 2 or 3 years. I believe there's another fines and fee bill this year. I'll have to go back and check. We're early on in the process, but it is a major, major issue, and there's a good coalition of organizations working on that. And the stories that they bring to the Capitol are just, it's so disturbing how it becomes such a cycle for folks. That even after they've gone through the process, they can never get out of the process. And they can't get a job, and then they can't pay, and then they can't pay, so they get brought back in. They get brought back in, they can't keep a job. I mean, it is it's absolutely absurd that that's how our system works. So I think over the last 5 or 6 years, there's been a lot of forgiveness for late fines that we've pushed through the legislature. Started off as a pilot project, and then it grew, and then it's a change in the statute, and it's a change in more fees. Then there's a bill last year. I think you don't have to pay. I think juveniles don't have to pay a fee, for when they're in juvenile hall. So it's like all of these different things. So hopefully we will get there. But it is absolutely destroying a lot of people's lives. So that's a very good one. Let me call on one other one. And so I went middle and I went right. Let's call on. I called on Sophia already. Let's call on Hannah. Go right and then full left. Hannah, any policy areas that you've been interested in the criminal justice space?
Well, we have a kind of a policy brief proposal thing, and I'm picking. I just think that a lot of people come into prisons addicted to opioids and such. So I think all prisoners, and even if you don't have an addiction history, should have Narcan on them, just in case, because there shouldn't be any deaths while in custody.
Very good.
Just a simple thing that everyone can have on hand, not just the wardens and stuff, but just everybody. That's
great. That's a great issue and a great approach. And it really goes to, what do we do when folks are in there, right? And what are we doing to help them with whatever challenges they have going in, so that when they go out, they're in better position, right? I mean, at the end of the day, that's the goal. That's better for everybody, right? So oftentimes,
and even providing them the education of how to use it, even if they're not going to use it while in prison, just for afterwards. If there are any
programs on that right now?
It was hard for me to find in all the California policy for the correctional facilities, but I know there's a lot of programs about sending them home with kits for it.
Right.
Because there's high risk when they're out too. So I know about that, but I couldn't find that much about what the current policies are for requiring everyone to have one.
yeah, if you still run into trouble with that, feel free to reach out to me or my office, and we'll ask the CDCR. I talk to them frequently, and I ask them questions all the time. So
Perfect.
I don't know as much as I know. I don't know everything. So, but we can get information pretty quickly from them. So.
Okay, thank you so much. I probably will reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are good. I like those. We're talking. Those are issues on the back end with the fines and fees, issues when folks are incarcerated. So it's good. We're kind of attacking this pipeline, right, in this cycle. So that's good. Let me jump into a couple of things. Let's see if I can manage my time here, because I do want to call on a number of other folks. And I guess we'll do this going forward. If I do call on you, just, if you're a student, you're a community member, if you kind of have a trajectory of where you're going, professionally, if you can add that in, and, anything else. So let me mention two things that I'm working on this year. That may be kind of interesting. They're kind of a little bit different angles on criminal justice reform, and this will be an example of how sometimes we can get there in ways that are a little bit subtle sometimes. And so one, and I want to try not to bore you all with the legalese. Are there any attorneys here? Show of hands. No? Okay. Well, I'll do my best not to, get trapped in the legalese on it. But so right now in California, for almost all felonies, if you're arrested and you're convicted, there are 3 possible sentences, right? And they call it the upper term, the middle term, and the low term, right? Show of hands, people heard of that, are kind of familiar with that? Yeah. Anybody know that there are 3 terms? Okay. So now you know. See, now you guys have some, next time you're on Zoom with a friend, like, hey, did you know that on a felony there are 3 different terms, right? This is important. This would be good stuff. So in the 70s, also generically, because I can't remember exactly what years, up until the 70s, when you were arrested for a felony and convicted of a felony in California, you only had a minimum term, meaning you had to spend 5 years in prison. I'm going to oversimplify this a little bit, but you would spend, let's say there's a felony and it's 5 years in prison. You would do that 5 years, and then there would be a committee that would decide whether or not you've been rehabilitated enough to get out. So somebody could spend 5 years and get out 5 years in one day for a certain crime. There could be someone else, the exact same crime, could go in and spend 15 years. And that was one of the drivers of kind of the large incarceration rates in California. And also the inconsistency in sentencing, and the racial disparities in sentencing was in large part due to what we call indeterminate sentencing. And so it was a big problem, I mean, can you imagine that you get arrested and they're like, well, how am I going to be in there? Well, 5 years, but who knows? It could be longer. I mean, how do you plan for that? How do you, when you are in prison, how do you take the classes necessary where okay, I'm going to get out in a year? How do you, build up good time credits where you feel confident, like, oh yeah, that'll get me down to 4 years or 4.5 years. You could end up being in there for, not forever, but fairly close. And again, I'm kind of oversimplifying, but essentially that's how it worked. When Jerry Brown was governor the first time, he changed it. And he said, no, we're going to make it determinate sentencing. That will take away racial disparities. That will make sure that, everybody kind of has the exact same sentence. And consistency is important. And so he adopted this, what they call the Triad System, which is, like I said, the low term, the middle term, and the upper term. And when the legislature passed the law, they said every person, whether you're in Fresno County, Alameda County, Contra Costa County, San Diego, every person convicted of a felony will get the middle term. Okay, that's it. That is going to be the consistency across the state. Not matter your race, not matter your age, it's going to be middle term. But then the court can consider some good facts about you, right? Mitigating factors, right? And then if there's enough good facts about you, then the judge can give you the low term. The flip side is if there's some bad facts about you or about the case, then the judge can give you the maximum term, the upper term. So let's say I was just looking at the statute today, I think it was a 4, 5, and 7, right? So you're going to get 5 years in the middle, but if there's some good facts, maybe down to 4. But if some bad facts, you're going to get 7, right? It's kind of a big difference. And there are others that have larger disparities. And so that was the law. That was the law. And then in 2007, which seems like a long time ago, but it's actually yesterday, and I'll explain to you why. In 2007, the United States Supreme Court came out and said, oh, you know, this Triad System, yeah, California, yeah, it's unconstitutional. And it created chaos. We no longer have for a moment in time, there was not a felony sentencing law in California that was constitutional. And folks were freaking out like, oh my God, can we actually sentence people to prison because the US Supreme Court just said it's unconstitutional? And the reason being is this, and I'm trying to get into the legal stuff too much, but what the Supreme Court said was the aggravating facts, the facts that would move you from the middle term to the upper term, if they are facts, the judge has no legal authority to determine whether that fact is true or not true. That is not the jurisdiction of a judge. The jurisdiction of the judge is to interpret and apply law. The jurisdiction of deciding facts to be true or not true is rest in whom? In a criminal trial. Heather.
The jury. Oh, sorry.
The jury. Yeah. The facts are presented by the prosecutor to the jury, and then the jury decides beyond a reasonable doubt which fact, you know, whether someone's guilty, but they're really deciding which facts are true. So facts are decided by jury, laws decided by judge, an application of law. So that's why the US Supreme Court said, well, if everyone's getting the middle term, that is what you know you're going to get when you're convicted. Those are the facts presented to the jury. Any facts that increase that can only be presented to the judge if the jury has already heard them and have already decided them to be true. So prosecutors freaked out. A defense attorney said, well, great. Now, none of my folks will get anything above the middle term, and they'll only get the lower middle term. We've just lopped off, 25 to 40% of the length of sentences in California. I mean, that is the best way right there to just kind of, cut down how long people are in prison. The U.S. Supreme Court did it in one decision. So there was a scramble to pass a law in California. The prosecutors came out and said, well, their proposal was to allow judges to just pick which of the three. It's completely up to the judge, not based on any facts, okay? Because facts go to the jury. But once someone is convicted, then the judge can decide he or she can pick the maximum, the middle, or the low term. I put forward a proposal, and I gathered, organized a bunch of folks. We put forward a proposal that said, well, let's just follow what the Supreme Court said. We keep the middle term presumption, and then aggravating facts have to first go to a jury, and then if it goes to a jury and they find them to be true, then the judge can consider them. But if it's not presented to the jury or not found to be true by the jury, then the judge cannot consider those facts. So that was the big fight. Ultimately, I lost that fight. Remember I said I don't like losing? Okay, see, all of this will connect in a second. So I lost that fight. And they literally changed the word aggravating fact to aggravating factor. Because if it's not a fact, then it doesn't have to go to the jury. If it's just a factor, the judge can consider it in sentencing. So I lost that one. But what I did win in that bill was a sunset. Everyone know what that is? Sunset in the statute. Have I called on Hillary? I don't know how much you guys have read statutes at all.
I haven't heard of it.
Okay. What do you think that means? So if a bill has a sunset, what does that mean?
Just like a limit to it, or?
Yeah. Exactly. It expires. It sunsets it, right? It comes to life one day, and then on a certain day it goes away. And so the one thing that I did get in that bill was a sunset. I think it was a 4-year sunset. So the law was in place for 4 years. And I did it because, again, I don't like losing. And I was like, all right, well, fine. Fine. If you're going to pass this, then I want a sunset. I want to be able to come back, and we want to see if it works, it doesn't work, whatever argument I made. But really in the back of my head, I kept thinking, maybe one day things will be different. Here I am, the the eternal optimist. One day things are going to be different in the Capitol, and I'll be back. It was really kind of funny, when I look back at it. But lo and behold, that statute, there was a sunset. That sunset got extended, but I kept it from becoming permanent. Then it was extended again. I kept it from becoming permanent. And guess what? It expires at the end of this year. So at the end of 2021, that our felony sentencing law is going to be gone again. So about a month ago, I was able to Senator Steve Bradford, who is out of the Gardena area in Los Angeles, is the new chair of the Senate Public Safety Committee. He oversees all the criminal justice reform bills as they come through the Senate. He decided that he agreed to author the proposal that I put forward back in 2007. Actually, he agreed to author a proposal that's actually better than what we had in 2007. And here's what it will do. It will say that the judge retains discretion. If someone's convicted of a felony in California, the judge can sentence that person to the middle term or the lower term. Judge's discretion. Okay, that's pretty good, because remember, before it was a presumptive middle term. So now we're like, yeah, you can pick the middle or the low term. And the only way to get to the upper term is if there are aggravating facts presented to the jury found them true, and then the judge can consider them. So we did kind of a hybrid model. I'm very excited about this because, it took, 13 years, 14 years. But here we are back in a very different environment on criminal justice reform. So I really think we might have an opportunity to get this bill through. And at the end of the day, if this happens, we got rid of the presumption of the middle term. So the 4, 5, or 7, right? So we're not presuming 5, it's going to be 4 or 5, take your pick. And then we're also going to put kind of a lid to get to the maximum, say, you can't get to the maximum unless you're going to give us some other bad facts. And you presented those facts to the jury and you prove those facts to the jury, which means I can cross-examine witnesses to prove that they're not true. So it's going to be a lot harder to get to the upper term. If I remember correctly, I think about a third, if I'm not mistaken, about a third of all people in California state prisons are serving the maximum term of a triad, okay, the upper term. So if we can reduce, even if it's 20%, 30% of cases in California get the middle term or the low term instead of the upper term, we've just lopped off a lot of years of people being in prison in one fell swoop in a very procedural, legalese kind of way. But it's also very fair, right? It seems to make sense, right? It's like if this is, because remember, the last thing I'll mention on this is, remember in the 70s, I said they adopted this law because they wanted some expectation of what you would be sentenced to. So they created this middle term. So that's really what you should get. You shouldn't get more than that unless it's the worst of the worst or some exceptional circumstance. It shouldn't be a third of everyone going in. How can you have the worst of the worst, but it's a third of the people getting in? That doesn't make any sense to me. My kids are in school, so, I have flashbacks, but I'm pretty sure if they're, ranked in the third of their class, they're not considered the top of the class. So I'm not sure how right now we're saying that our system's fair, where we're giving the upper term to a third of the people when that's supposed to be reserved for the worst of the worst. So if we can get this through, and it will not be easy, but it will be much, we have a better shot at it now than we did before years ago. It'll have a huge, huge impact. So this is one, the bill number is Senate Bill 567, easy for me to remember. And it's something to really keep in mind because it will be a major, major shift if we can get this through. Now, a little tying the story all together. Remember I mentioned the law about the drug transportation. That bill, like I said, was one of the first to undo a felony. It was at the time introduced by this young assembly member named Stephen Bradford. So the legislator who ran my first bill back in whatever the year that was, 2002 or 3 or 4, whatever it was, to change the felony sentence. He was assembly member. He left. He came back as a senator. And now he's chair of Senate Public Safety. And now he's running this major thing. And we had a kind of a laugh about it because he goes, "Oh, I remember this from 14 years ago." He's like, "Well, you were right. You said you're going to have another chance at it. So let's give it a shot." but for me, it's exciting because it's a way to get the system right. And it's a way to make sure that it's balanced and it's fair. And it's a way to really cut down on the mass incarceration for those that get that far in the system. We want to stop people before then, but and stop people getting arrested and even charged. And we deal with a lot of that right now. But as far as once they are there, we want to make sure they go in for appropriate amount of time and not over sentenced. So anyway, so that's any questions on that bill? Okay. I'm going to go for five. I think is it 5:35 or 5:45? What's my deadline?
We actually have until 5:45 or 6 o'clock. I just threw that in there, like,
okay.
But,
me. I keep going. It's funny. I'm not a very talkative person except when I come to these forums, so it's great. So let me mention one other bill I'm working on, and then we can talk about some other things. Okay. We were talking about the impact on the back end, right, and the fines and fees. And so, how many of you have heard about the big push to either eliminate money bail or reform the bail system, right? There's a big initiative. Just show of hands. Everyone's kind of heard of that, right? Okay. If not, that's okay. Those are on the phone. I can, if you're raising your hand, that's great. If not, so that's a big deal, right? Bail reform is a big deal, and we can talk about that. I could spend 2 hours talking about that because it's many layers to it. But there's a related issue, kind of sort of related issue that I'm taking on this year. And again, it's this way to kind of attack the criminal justice system from different angles, And what happens now is that somebody could have a misdemeanor or a felony conviction. Again, I'm dealing on the back end now. And they're on probation. And during probation, they have to follow certain rules. They have to check a probation officer. Maybe they have to take classes. They have to pay their fines and fees, right? As Tina mentioned, there are all of these requirements. What happens if you mess up? What happens? Let me call on. Let's go top of the screen. And I know I always mess up my name. Is it McGeegan? Mishkan, I'm sorry. Mishkan. So what do you think? And it's okay. This is just kind of top of our head what we think. So let's say you're on probation, or your friend's on probation. I don't ever like putting people in it, but your friends are on probation, and your friend's supposed to go drug testing once a month or twice a month, and stops going. What's going to happen to him or her? What do you think?
I would assume they would get put back into jail, or have another strike against them.
Yep, very good. So your first response, I tell folks that our instincts are so sharpened you don't even realize, right? But that's exactly it. So basically, what happens if you're on probation and you mess up, or you fail to comply with the conditions of probation, you will be rearrested. You will be brought into court. And here's kind of the interesting thing that happens in our system. Okay, it's a dual system. Okay, or there are parallel tracks. If you are brought in on something that is not a crime, okay, it is that you simply violated one of the conditions of probation, or you didn't comply. Okay, so let's talk about that scenario first. You can be brought in, and then you get a hearing, because you might say, well, wait a minute. I didn't go in because I was in the hospital. That's why I missed my drug treatment, my drug test. That seems like a good reason, right? You are entitled to a hearing before they revoke probation. Because what they can do is they can remove your probation and instead put you in jail or prison for that time period. So if you have a 3-year probation, they could revoke that and put you in jail for 3 years. Or they could have another agreement where they could put you in for even longer, right? So that's why there's a lot at stake. So you need a hearing, right? That's kind of our due process. That's kind of fairness, right? Our fair system, right? They can't lock you up for that long without a hearing, especially if you think you have a good defense. So you get a hearing. Now here's the little catch in the system. They bring you in and they're like, okay, you get arrested, or they bring you in. Hey, you violated probation. Your hearing is set for what's today, March 9th. Your hearing is set for June 1st. What happens to you between now and June 1st? Any guesses? Anybody? They just hand you a little
Incarcerated, probably.
Incarcerated. Who said that?
Tina.
Tina, okay. Yes, you're incarcerated. Now think about that for a second. You have a hearing 2.5 months from now, 3 months from now, to prove, because you want to prove that you did not commit the probation violation, but yet you're incarcerated between now and then. Seems like something's off. Now let's talk about the bail, right? We were talking about the bail issue. What's that about? That's about you're arrested for a crime, and then you're incarcerated until you get to court or until you can get to trial. And we said, well, there's something wrong about that, right? That pretrial detention, you can't get out. Well, bail's very high most of the time. Most of the time people can't afford bail, but at least there's bail. At least there's some way to get out, right? If you can, get the money together, get the bail agents to, whatever it is. On a probation violation, guess what? You have no right to be released. You have no right to post bail. You can just be held for 2-3 months. It's about average about 2 months, 2.5 months, how long it takes to get a hearing. So imagine being in that scenario. You're like, wait a minute, I know I didn't violate. I have a good reason, but I can't get to a hearing. You're gonna lose your job, maybe impact your family, right? All of these things that will happen. And you do not have a right to get out. So the bill we are working on this year, and I'm probably gonna screw up the number, but I'll see if I can remember it, is going to say that if you are arrested, or if you're picked up, if you're picked up for a probation violation, you have a right to be released unless the court determines that you're a safety threat, or there's got to be some threshold for them to find that you need to stay in. But even then, you will have a right to bail. So that's how we drafted our bill. We said you have a right to get released. You have a right to get released on conditions, meaning maybe you have to check in every week. Maybe you have to do an ankle monitor. Maybe you have to do something that will allow you to continue with your life, right? But if none of those are appropriate, then you at least have a right to bail so you can get out if you can afford it. But at least there's some way to get out. So that's what our bill does. Hold on, there's someone at my door. Hold on. And I'm back. Okay. So the bill that we're running will do this, and we kind of take the idea of bail reform and we apply it to the end of the process when you're on probation. The other thing we do is this: if you are same scenario, but let's say instead of missing your drug testing, instead you get arrested because you get in a fight at a bar. Okay, and so you get arrested for misdemeanor battery. Let's say that's a new crime. Okay. Well, you have violated your probation because part of probation condition, you promise not to commit new crimes, not to break the law. So they can hold you on that probation violation. What's really unfair is that if you weren't on probation and you were alleged to have committed this offense, you could get out. You at least have a right to bail or a right to get out on conditions. But if you're on probation, you would have no right, even though it hasn't been proven that you actually committed the alleged offense. So what we did on this, and again, part of lobbying is thinking big picture, setting things up for tomorrow, but also setting things up for a year or two from now. So when bail reform was being discussed, the Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court was putting together a working group on bail reform, pretrial detention. We spoke to her and we spoke with her staff, and we said, when you're looking at this, you should also look at what happens with probation violations. Don't just limit yourself to pretrial detention. Also look at post-probation detention. And so the report that came out of the working group about 4 years ago, that really became the basis for the bail reform. It's about 98%, 99% about pretrial detention. But there's a small portion in her report, or not the working group report, that says, the other thing we need to work on is probation violation detention. Like, that's not right. And so now we have a bill this year, and now as we're making our pitch on the bill, we're like, go back and look at the California Supreme Court working group on on bail reform, and there's a section just on this issue. So it isn't just us coming up with it, it's the California Supreme Court's been talking about it. So, that was something we did deliberately, and it happened to work out. But it's something that's going to be important because, as you know, bail reform was repealed, right? There's a referendum at the ballot, on the ballot. And so it was repealed. So we don't have bail reform in California right now. But what we did is we put into this bill essentially what we think bail reform should look like, which is a little bit different than the law that was passed. And we also incorporate a recent California Supreme Court decision that says if bail is imposed, bail should only be set at an amount that somebody can afford. So it's essentially a sliding scale, okay? So what we've put into our bill is that you look at, you're released with conditions, and as a last resort, bail is imposed. Unless for some reason, it's like, quadruple homicide, then you're not going to get out on probation violation. Like, that's not going to happen. But you're not going to get out anyway. But the last resort would be bail. But we say in our bill, bail can only be set at an amount that is affordable for that individual, okay? Because that is what the California Supreme Court back in August, in a subpart of a temporary order, said that's what the law should be in California. And so for right now, temporarily in California, the law for bail is it has to be set at an amount that is affordable. Right? It's an access issue. So we're going to test it out and put it into our statute if we can get this thing passed. And then we think we will set up for bail reform going forward. There is a bail reform bill this year. We don't like how it's drafted. We're going to try to fix it. But I think this gives you an example of like me being in this business for so long. Sometimes I just see an issue, that's wrong, let's fix it. We run a bill to fix it. Sometimes it's a little bit layered, right? We're taking this, we're doing this, we're putting a sunset, we're setting it up, we're getting this in a report, we're running other bills. I went through a 4-year process where I ran bills on prosecutorial misconduct, because really what I wanted to do was create a new felony, believe it or not, to put prosecutors in. The only new felony I supported, put a prosecutor in jail for withholding evidence of innocence, because that's where a lot of our wrongfully convicted were coming from, what was going on. And so I wanted to run a bill that would make it a felony, but I knew that wouldn't pass. And so I spent 3 years attacking the issue of prosecutorial misconduct from different angles. And by the end of it, I had legislators telling me, well, this is great what you're doing, Ignacio, but why isn't this a crime? I had Republicans telling me this should be a crime. I was like, oh, that's a great idea. I hadn't thought of that. And then we ran the bill on our 4th year and it passed unanimously. And so there is a felony on the books now for a DA that withholds evidence of innocence. No one's been prosecuted yet under it, as far as I know. But the threat of it is, we think, is helpful. So lobbying can be very simple and straightforward. It could also be very complex. And I think being around this long, and I'm one of the more veteran criminal justice lobbyists now, which is very odd because I'm 22. But we'll see. We'll see what happens with that. So let me stop there. Wait, there's a question. We'll have a trade when that happens. That's there you go. Anyway, so let me ask some questions now. Are there any questions about the 2 proposals that I mentioned? Let me start there. Okay.
I do have
Go ahead, Tina.
I can, I was just curious of the bill number. You said you were going to do it by memory, not uber important for the.
If you give me 30 seconds, I'll find it for you, because I was just drafting an amendment to it today. That's the other thing is, I'm able to put my law degree to use because I'm actually draft up these statutes. So it's AB 1228. 1228. That is the
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, that's a probation violation one. Hillary has a question. How is individual bail affordability determined? Great question. We're not sure yet. I mean, that's the honest answer. I think the procedural answer is that The accused will have to present some sort of information about his or her financial status. And then the judge will have to decide kind of what's a fair amount. So again, that's going to be a last resort. That is not the first issue. That's going to be the last resort. But that's how it is. We're waiting on. I should just mention one other thing. So the case is Humphrey. Is it People v. Humphrey? It's Humphrey, and that is the case that is pending at the California Supreme Court. That will determine what the law will be on bail in California. We're waiting on that decision. It could be any week now. I think it'll come in April. And that is the decision that will, we think, address the issue of how do you determine bail affordability. It will also establish the permanent law in California regarding bail. As I mentioned, there's a temporary law because of a temporary order, or a sub part of a temporary order. But it's basically, you just kind of assess it in the same way that someone has to be, their economic status has to be assessed on whether or not they qualify for a public defender. It's kind of the same way, what their assets are, what their income is. It's probably going to be those things. So did the sub part of the temporary order result from SB 10? No, that actually came from the Humphrey decision, the Humphrey case. There was Humphrey, and there was another case that actually was making its way through the the court system. And then in August of 2020, the California Supreme Court issued a small temporary order on a small piece of the pending case, the case that will finally be decided in April. More or less in April. And they put in there that bail, constitutionally, bail has to be set in an amount that's affordable. Again, those are my words. Because otherwise you're denying someone the right to bail. There is no, for all practical purposes, there is not, there, I should back up. There is a right to bail in most cases in California, not all, but in most cases. And that is actually in the California Constitution. There's also some federal issues. So the California Supreme Court reasoned that right to bail is denied if bail is set at an amount that is so high that you can never afford it. And so that's why they say the ability to pay, it has to be looked at. But that was a temporary order.
I had a quick question. This is Eleni. This is so amazing. Thank you so much. My question was a little bit different. I was wondering if you have, if you know of any prisons that are kind of exemplary, where recidivism is really at a low rate, and what they're doing. And then, is there any work around mandating literacy or a certain level? If you haven't gotten your GED before you get out of jail, that's required, and then you need to go on to college or some kind of, I know it's offered sporadically, but yeah, thank you.
I don't have that answer on the second part, and on the first one, I don't know. I think there are programs within certain prisons that have been identified as being extremely effective. I can't think of which ones those would be off the top of my head, but I do know that there have been reports about which programs are most effective. It tends to be the academic ones. It tends to be the ones that work on long-term skills. And then, but I don't know. But that's actually a good question. I actually should have something like that handy. But thank you for the question. Sorry, I couldn't give it a better answer.
No worries. Thank you so much.
Sure. All right. Questions?
I just had a quick question about, it's kind of going along with cash bail. Who holds prosecutors accountable if they, set or convince the judge to set bail that's way more than what the individual can afford historically?
Right. Right. So that's a good question. So ultimately, it's the judge's decision. So it wouldn't be the DA. The DA can make that argument. And so the question would be, who would hold the judge accountable? It's a great question. The only thing you can do is file an appeal and try to go to appellate court and say, hey, I think this judge imposed bail at a rate that was at an amount that was too high. That's really all you can do. Or you could file a motion to have it reconsidered and try to get in front of a different judge, which is what a lot of attorneys do, which I've done in the past. So the one tidbit, and again, I try to be very balanced in my, share of information, but keep in mind that bail schedules, which we always hear, money bail schedules are very, very high, right? California, people can't afford them, right? It's the whole problem. Bail schedules are drafted on a county by county basis. So Fresno County has its own bail schedule. Alameda, Contra Costa, they all have their own. Those bail schedules are drafted by a group of local judges. So the judges are so every time I hear this complaint about bail's so high, it's the system. I was like, no, it's the judges. Like, someone needs to talk to the judges about why are they setting the bail schedules so high? And then who are the only ones that have the authority to deviate from the bail schedule? Oh, it's the judges. So it's a very odd thing that if the bail schedule is too high, only a judge in that county can deviate from that. And then if they won't deviate, or if they impose bail that's too high, the only thing you can do is try to go to a different judge. That's really all you can do, maybe at a higher level. So that's one of the key systems. The bill proposal on bail reform this year, there are two that are identical, one is Senate, one Assembly. One thing we don't like in the bill is that they create a statewide bail schedule. So the bail amount for a robbery would be the same in San Diego as it is in MODOC. We have issues with that. But the other issue we have is that statewide bail schedule will be written by judges. So I keep saying, well, isn't that the problem? Nobody really likes me criticizing the judges. So, but I'm just saying. Anyway, questions? Any topic? Rapid fire. We have 10 minutes, 5 minutes, however long, 15 minutes. Or I'll ask you guys questions. Criminal justice proposals, anything I've talked about.
I have a question.
Is Gail on here? Where's Gail?
Gail is on.
Oh, there's Gail in the corner. Okay, I didn't even know you were there, Gail, this whole time. I would have talked about Obi. You notice I didn't talk about Obi this time. Yes, go ahead.
And that's kind of my next question, but I'll let someone else ask a question that would probably lead to Obi. But have precedents set in other states where cash bail is ended through legislation that's been passed? Has that been helpful to you and your colleagues in proposing amendments or new bills?
On the bail, typically you're asking about bail specifically or other? Just generally. Yeah,
like in terms of ending cash bail or just reforming or sort of any of those bills that are like in that direction. Have they served to be helpful?
Yeah, for the bills I work on, less so. I know that there is national work on the bail reform. It is a big national push, and so they are looking at it in other states. And there are folks who are working on it in other states that that are also working on it here in California. As far as it hasn't helped me too much because we've kind of drawn from kind of the constitutional principles and some of the things that have been happening here just in California. But typically we do look at other states and look what they're doing and sometimes collaborate. And sometimes the same groups are working on it here are working on other states. And sometimes, I was on a call a few months ago with senator out of Connecticut, something. He's one of the most progressive legislators I've ever spoken to. He was passing all kinds of stuff on police reform. So we do check in with folks around the country, probably not as much as we should. But there are groups, and there are some national groups like the Innocence Project, gets involved in California. So questions? I didn't call on a lot of people, so you guys are getting away easy tonight.
I have a question. So how as an individual, this is Tina. Yeah. How can as an individual or community we support these efforts in prison reform?
If there are bills that you hear about, it can be a letter of support. It could be as an individual. It could be letter of support from organizations that you're aware of. It could be, a class, as a group of students, you guys decided to write a letter of support. I mean, I don't know if you guys can do it officially, but, it's letters of support, it's social media, getting the issue out there, talking to your legislator, reaching out, to your local legislator. Every little, piece of the puzzle makes a difference, especially on these things. Yeah. Or even a legislator that that you're not in the district, but maybe him, her, or him. All those little things. It happens all the time where a legislator says, my cousin, I was at a party for my cousin, and her friend raised this issue with me. I was really not aware of it. I mean, it happens all the time. What else?
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So what laws would you guys like to teach? Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. So I feel like the reforms that you're working on now in terms of the bills, the amendment, and dealing with having bail be set at something that's affordable, and or someone, just having statutes that say, someone can be released or released with conditions. I could see that this would be a way to decarcerate, our populations in prison in California, number one. And then I also see direct impacts on health. And you had discussed the issues around, like, of course, what we were thinking, what would happen to someone once they are put into detention post sentencing or post probation. Either way, there are going to be huge impacts on that individual's ability to contribute to their family income, continue school. It's a complete disruption. Could you discuss more, about the, public health implications of bail reform?
Yeah, I mean, it excuse me, it really is, all the issues that you described already, right? I mean, what the impacts of being incarcerated, because look, being incarcerated, there's different psychological impact maybe, or dynamic, whether it's pre-trial or after conviction, or after, if it's you are out and then you go back in. But the reality is how it impacts, your family, or the health impacts, or academics, educational attainment afterwards, is kind of the same, right? Those are lost days, those are lost years, those are lost, opportunities with your family. I mean, I'm sure you guys see the studies of what the impact is on children when their parents are incarcerated, even for a short period of time. The ability to provide economically, the access to health care, the health disparities that result of somebody who, has been incarcerated and comes out is not, employed, or not employed for a time period. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. So I leave that to all of you. All of you are kind of the public health folks, but I mean, it's devastating. And that's why for me, even whether it's a day, a week, 2 months, 3 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, if we can shorten that time frame, then maybe we can shorten the amount of, the negative impact, the adverse impacts, right, on economic, opportunity for individuals. They get out sooner, right? They get out sooner, they get to work sooner. Maybe they have more years of, in social, building up Social Security because they have a job longer. I mean, there are all these little things that just make a difference of, if you're in prison for a year less, or 2 years less, or 5 years less, or 2 months less. I mean, every attorney, and I've probably told this story a million times, but, I'll say two things. There was a woman I represented one time, I think 60 years old, grandma. She was arrested for beating up an officer, which she didn't do. Her bail was, money bail was like, extremely high. She couldn't afford it. She ordered a Campbell soup, and she was arrested on a Thursday or Friday of a holiday weekend, and so she wasn't going to get in court till. Anyway, it was a mess. She had been at her job for 25 years at Campbell Soup in the factory, and she was going to lose her job because she was going to be out for a week because she couldn't show up. The devastation on someone like that, and it's just a handful of days because she couldn't afford bail. she was taking care of her, not only her children, but she was also taking care of her grandchildren. Her children were on her health care. I think at the time they were younger. They were living with her. I mean, she was the economic engine for that family. And so she wasn't there. I mean, it was awful. It was awful. And the DA wouldn't, the DA fought, like you were talking, somebody asked about what happens if the DA fights, the bail reduction. I mean, it was awful. Fortunately, I got a good judge. Eventually, we got him to lower the bail. She still had to post bail, which was ridiculous, and got out. So it can make a big difference. The other thing, and I tell this because, I don't know, for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons why I got into this is that you don't know what's going to happen to somebody when they're incarcerated. Like, we forget about that sometimes. Not just like the longer term issues, but are they going to get injured? Are they going to get sick? Is something going to trigger in them? Is it going to trigger mental health issues that they have, right? Is it going to trigger an addiction that, or flare up an addiction, and then they're going to deal with that the rest of their lives? Just don't know. And sometimes statistically we can't capture that, but it happens. I think maybe it's a good way to end. Well, actually, I want to end up on a good note, but on a sad note. When I was a kid, when I was, I don't know, 7th grade or something, a friend of mine was incarcerated. And I think joyriding, whatever it was, and juvenile hall, and he didn't come home. He got sick. He was there for, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks. He got sick, got pneumonia. They wouldn't take him to the hospital. They thought he was faking. He's 13 years old, whatever. He died. There was no need for him to be in there that long. So I always remind folks that we should absolutely look at the long term and the broader impact. That's important. But let's not forget, like, the faces of the people. Like, maybe they did something wrong, but is this really the way to handle it, right? Or should he really have given his life? And what's the impact now on his parents? I mean, I know his family. What's the impact on his brothers? They lost their brother, right? The mom and dad, were devastated. Just on and on and on, right? They're, as I always say, they're people. We watch these Netflix shows and they have the worst of the worst, the Night Stalker and all that, which I thought I'd have time to talk about that, but I don't. But I'll tell you my story about the Night Stalker, meeting him. But most of the folks that are in, the overwhelming majority, are folks that have committed kind of lower level felonies. I mean, really is what we're talking about. They're not a lot different than us, they're just in a different circumstance. And so that, to me, is what troubled me so much about our criminal justice system, that I can easily say half the people in there really shouldn't be there. There's a different way to handle it, right? Or, the mental health thing. Maybe I'll end on this. The upside is that I'm reading more and more about, and there's some legislation on this as well, of local cities and counties, creating these mental health response teams. To me, I think that is going to be just, immensely impactful. Instead of sending police or only police to go deal with somebody who has a mental health issue, I think is the way we should be really looking at, what we call crime right now, right? Because it's intertwined. Because this time they're going out on a mental health call, the next time they're coming out because the mental health condition wasn't dealt with, and they committed a violent act, right? I mean, you all know this as much as I do. But we have to change how we approach it, right? And I think for me, seeing that I just read today, I forget what city it was, that they announced they're going to switch funding, a portion of police funding, over to mental health response teams. The more we do that, we are completely changing our mindset, and all the discussions that you all have about public health and the intertwining between criminal justice and public health. It's going to be a completely different discussion, because we're going to say, okay, well, how do we ensure how do we not just address the issue now that they committed this crime or whatever it is, but how do we ensure we're dealing with this person so that we're not arresting them in 6 months from now, or in a year from now, or 3 years from now, right? That's really what we should be doing. We should be like, okay, we're catching them now, but what do we do to help long term? I think for me, that is the intersection of in one of the aspects where public health and criminal justice reform is really important is on the front end. The more we do that, and for me, seen family and friends go through mental health issues, but for the grace of God, they got mental health, assistance as opposed to being incarcerated. That's all the difference. So anyway, as I've always said, I'm very excited of all the work that all of you are doing in this program and letting me come and just kind of, rant for a couple of hours or hour and a half, whatever. I always enjoy it. There's a lot of other bills that are going on, and I could always send them. There's stuff on gang enhancements. Oh, I should have talked about that. There's a bill to reduce gang enhancements or the use of gang enhancements, making it harder, which is, can't tell you how many people are spending more time in prison because of gang enhancements and being listed as being a gang member because, they had a red hat, they're really just a local little, crew of kids. So there's a bill that's going to make it a lot harder to impose that extra time. I'm not working on that directly, but that's, to me, one of the most important bills this year. There's a ton of, I think I'm working on about another 10. So there's a lot. So the bottom line is, as I said at the very beginning, there's a lot going on in the Capitol. The bills I'm working on, the bills I'm not working on, the budget items, so much happening. And if anybody, obviously I would invite you to the Capitol, but I can't right now. But if they ever open up and you guys want to come see the inner workings of the Capitol, I have not stepped foot in the Capitol since March 13th of last year. So, but definitely just come to a hearing. The hearings are now televised. They're not as exciting as they used to be, but the Public Safety Committee hearings, if you want to hear debate on some of the criminal justice bills, Tuesday mornings, there is typically when they're held. And there was stuff today on police accountability. There was stuff on getting people into drug treatment versus incarceration. I forget, there are 2 or 3 other really, really key things. So that might be a good thing. So thank you so much, everybody. I think that's it. I took you right to the end.
Thank you so much, Ignacio. I am really excited to hear more about all of the legislation you're working on and other bills that you maybe not be directly, working on, especially gang enhancement. We still at Touro plan to form a think tank. And you gave us that idea. I think it was last year or the year before. I don't know. And so we still want to do that. And going to the Capitol in a virtual format is something that I hope the students will be able to do this summer. And I'm really glad that you were able to touch on, a lot of the, some law which was really nice to hear. And I know, it's really great to hear that you touched on some of the statutes, because next summer, this class is going to be gaining an understanding of the seminal and precedent-setting public health law that, these cases that have led to serious reform in incarceration prevention, correctional and reentry health. And they'll be provided a foundation in constitutional law and civic education. And so we're going to focus on a wide, range of your issues regarding public health law and lots of regulations, but also look at like what are the factors that are at play when developing advocacy strategies that, really center on issues that are intersecting public health and criminal justice, and hopefully have an opportunity to really work with like organizations and who are doing the advocacy for policy reform and criminal justice. And I think that is, another way that, we as individuals, we're in this class, we're all, here learning together, community and students, that's another way that we can be a part of the solutions, is to get behind an organization. So that class really kind of focuses on that with the students. It's like the second half of this track before we're going into. Yeah, so I really appreciate you touching on, it's legal stuff and jargon, but it's great for us to hear because it's like the first step, and then the next step, students are going to have this experience and look back and go, oh, I remember Ignacio told us about this. So thank you so much.
And I will try to send out a list of kind of the big, we're just getting started in hearings, but I'll try to send you a list of what some of the bigger criminal justice bills are, and ones that deal with kind of the public health criminal justice overlap. So just give me a day or two, and in fact, I'll send a note to my staff right now. We can send you some of those bills just to take a look at. And I do really invite folks to just watch a hearing on some of these bills, and get involved with Exonerated Nation. I always have to make a plug for Exonerated Nation. It works with wrongfully convicted. I'm on the board with. Obi spoke to all of you, right?
He's coming next week. He's going to be speaking to us next week, and so we'll talk more about Obi's Law, AB 672, SB 1050, 701.
Ask him a lot of questions. Ask him a lot of questions. Good.
Well, thank you so much, Ignacio. I really, really appreciate it. This was, and I enjoy it so much as well when you come to speak with us. It's just really inspiring. So we hope we want to learn more about policy and what we can do as public health folks, as community leaders, and clinicians in this realm. So you've helped us. You helped kind of open our eyes in that area.
Well, I appreciate it, and thank you, all of you, and thank you for the path that all of you are on as well. I look forward to seeing you out there making the change that you believe in.
Thank you. I hope you get to go back to the Capitol soon. Maybe it'll be the end of summer, but
at some point.
And the Night Stalker, that's a scary, scary move. That used to scare me as a kid. I don't like that.
Yeah. I should have thrown that teaser out, but one day I'll tell that story. I don't think I've told Gail that story yet. All right.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for spending all this great, wonderful time with us this evening. And
absolutely.
We'll see.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.